So, Windows 11. That's a thing now. Microsoft recently announced Windows 11, and while it brings a lot of new and long overdue features, it existing at all is a bit confusing because Microsoft themselves said Windows 10 would be the last version of Windows ever. So what gives? Why does Windows 11 exist? How did it come to be? Well, let's find out. This is Windows 11 Explained. So quick disclaimer, I'm not going to go over all the new features of Windows 11 because I feel there are already a lot of videos out there on YouTube going over the Windows 11 update and its new features. Instead, I'm going to go over some of the reasons why Microsoft would have felt the need to come up with Windows 11 in the first place. We have to touch on two things first, Windows 10X and the Sun Valley update. Windows 10X was a version of Windows 10 announced in 2019 that was built and optimized for dual-screen devices. However, in 2020, Microsoft shifted their plans for Windows 10X a bit, instead focusing Windows 10X on being this lighter version of Windows 10 meant for single-screen cloud computing devices. And then for a while, news about Windows 10X sort of went quiet. There were no updates or changes to Windows 10X and we were sort of wondering what happened to it. Well, in May of this year we got our answer. Microsoft dropped the bombshell and announced they were going to cancel Windows 10X. In their blog post, Microsoft detailed that after more than a year of developing Windows 10X, they felt that what they had come up with from Windows 10X shouldn't be limited to a specific subset of devices, and instead they felt that it would be more beneficial to the users if they took what they learned and developed in Windows 10X and slowly integrated into the official Windows 10, bringing it to the mainstream. Then we have Sun Valley. Sun Valley was the codename given to an upcoming Windows update which was meant to refresh the user interface of Windows 10. The UI had gotten a bit stale and Windows 10, despite how good the UI was compared to 8, had a bit of inconsistency in its design language, and I wholeheartedly agree with this. As much as I like the design of Windows 10, some parts of it feel a bit incomplete and inconsistent. It took the new design elements from Windows 8 and tried to merge it with the traditional UI of Windows 7. Sun Valley aimed to fix that. It was meant to streamline the design in Windows and to sort of update the icons a bit, round off certain corners, give it a bit more transparency, make it look like almost every other operating system now in the 2020s. So as of May 2021, we knew two things. One, Microsoft killed Windows 10X, and two, Windows was about to get a new design overhaul. June comes around and Microsoft announces that they're going to hold an event on the 24th of June to announce a few changes to Windows, particularly in the design and updates to the Microsoft Store to make it more appealing to developers. And then this is where it gets interesting. On the morning of June 15th, leaks online showcased this new design of Windows. Everything looked updated and it looked overall more refreshed. And then, later in the day, an ISO leaks online, and what people found when they booted up that ISO is what changed everything. Because when they booted up that ISO, what they found was Windows 11. And the more people dug into this leaked ISO, the more apparent it became that this June 24th event was Microsoft announcing Windows 11 to the world. Eventually, Microsoft started issuing DMCA takedowns of these ISO files because they weren't meant for the public, they were leaked, so it was technically illegal. But right before they pulled these ISO files from the internet, I managed to grab a copy and I booted it up in a virtual machine on my laptop. And I played around with this leaked ISO file, and what I found inside was quite interesting. This so-called Windows 11 was basically a hybrid of what Microsoft was working on before. The UI was overhauled just like the Sun Valley update was meant to do. Everything had changed. The taskbar was in the middle now, the start button as well. The start menu did away with all those tiles from Windows 8 and instead it became this new app launcher like straight out of a smartphone. There was transparency, glass effects everywhere, there were new icons. The edges had been rounded off, the whole system just looked so much more sleeker and clean. For once, Windows felt like it had a consistent streamlined user interface. And you could tell they took a lot of inspiration from Apple and their Mac OS. What surprised me more was finding a lot of that Windows 10X DNA in this Windows 11 leak. Despite being killed off, you could feel that Microsoft had actually brought over a lot of the features from Windows 10X into Windows 11, just like they said they would. The new Start menu looks exactly like the one from Windows 10X, and the new Snap menus look like something that was optimized for touchscreen devices with multiple different screens. And then came the final thing that cemented Windows 11's existence in the public, and that was when Microsoft announced an end-of-life date for Windows 10. Which was October 2025. And end of life date basically means that after that date, the manufacturer is no longer going to support this piece of software. And the moment they announced that end of life date, we knew Windows 10 would not be the last version of Windows, and they had abandoned that idea to continuously update Windows 10 forever. And eventually, it was going to be replaced by Windows 11. What I find interesting is the nature of Windows 11 itself. On the surface, Windows 11 is this huge update with a new user interface, new performance enhancements, new features, new functions. But what I and many other people realized when we played with that leaked build of Windows 11 was Windows 11 is a lot closer to Windows 10 than you think. The users over at the rWindows subreddit have been playing around with this leaked build for weeks now, and something we all noticed was just how seamless the update was from Windows 10 to Windows 11. For past versions of Windows, whenever you upgraded from one version to the next major version, there were always things that would go wrong, from drivers not being updated, to certain programs just breaking on the new versions of Windows, to the worst case scenario, almost nothing working, just like we saw on certain revamps like Windows Vista and Windows 8. But this wasn't the case with Windows 11. Not only were users able to use their Windows 10 product key to activate this copy of Windows 11, but more often than not, almost everything worked out of the box when they upgraded from Windows 10 to this leaked build of Windows 11. I mean, even Linus Tech Tips took this leaked build of Windows and actually gamed on it with no issues.
It's just like runs. Yeah, I was expecting there to be some kind of fighting with it, you know, to get this running, but other than that, it just won't install on bare metal. It goes. I mean, look at this, Red Dead Redemption 2, ladies and gentlemen.
The next clue that Windows 11 shared a lot of its DNA with Windows 10 was when users started tampering around with the files found in Windows 11. And you know what they found? If you strip away a lot of these new libraries and assets from the Windows 11 update, the UI basically reverts back to Windows 10. You see where I'm going with this? Windows 11 is basically just Windows 10 with a fresh coat of paint. It could be argued that almost nothing introduced in Windows 11 could not have been introduced in Windows 10 through updates. So, why did Microsoft decide to spin off all these new updates into its own version of Windows? The first reason I can think of is it's purely marketing. We've already established that Windows 11 is basically Windows 10 underneath. There was nothing stopping Microsoft from bringing these changes down to Windows 10 eventually through updates. But if they did so, they would have been missing out on a giant opportunity. There's two key factors that probably pushed them to do this. The first was Apple announcing a new version of macOS last year and this year after years of staying on macOS 10. In the eyes of the public, Apple was innovating. They were coming up with new versions of macOS and coming up with new features to go along with those new versions. Meanwhile, Microsoft had somewhat stagnated. 2021 is a bit special because if you've noticed, a lot of companies are doing complete UI refreshes for their operating system, from Android 12 and now macOS 12. So Windows probably didn't want to miss out on this opportunity as well. And key factor number 2 was probably the reputation Windows 10 had by now. Look, I'm completely fine with Windows 10. There are still things that could be improved, but I had no doubt in my mind that Microsoft would eventually improve these things through updates in the coming months or years, since Windows 10 was meant to be this rolling release that would just keep getting better and better as the years went on. However, the public doesn't seem to think so. Go to any article or post online about Windows 10 and I guarantee you, half of those posts are users complaining about Windows 10 and just bashing it in general. Some of them are not happy with the new design of Windows 10, A lot of them are not happy with the bugs that constantly finds its ways into Windows 10 updates, and those updates, a lot of people really hated those updates when they kept coming in and disturbing them in the middle of work, just rebooting their devices while they were working on something with no warning whatsoever. And yeah, I mean, these were true when Windows 10 was first starting out, and those first few years were rough. But I would argue that over the years, things have gotten better for Windows 10, and a lot of these complaints actually have been addressed. But it doesn't matter. The public has formed their opinion around Windows 10, and no amount of updates was ever going to change that. So instead of trying to fix this sinking ship, what Microsoft might have thought to do was, why not branch out these new improvements and features into its own version of Windows, where it has already built up upon the strong foundations of Windows 10, but the hype around having a new version of Windows and all these shiny new features would make people fall in love with it. Deja vu? This is almost point for point exactly what happened with Windows Vista and Windows 7. Windows Vista was a major overhaul from Windows XP that came before it, just like Windows 10 was to Windows 8. And just like Windows 10, Windows Vista faced a lot of initial backlash because it overhauled the design people were already familiar with, and because it was such a major overhaul, a lot of things just didn't work, or there were a lot of initial bugs. And even though a lot of these changes would ultimately improve and shape the future of Windows, they were hated when they were first introduced. And just like Windows 10, Windows Vista required multiple years of updates and service packs just to iron out all these initial complaints and bugs, up to a point where it was actually quite decent and usable. But by then, it was too late. By the time Service Pack 2 of Windows Vista came out in 2009 and Vista was starting to get really good, Windows 7 was announced. Just like we're seeing now, Windows 7 was basically Windows Vista with a fresh coat of paint, a few new features and improvements, and basically it built off the strong foundations that Windows Vista had left behind. So as we've seen, Microsoft is no stranger to just cutting their losses and drumming up hype for new products that could have just been incremental updates, which is what we are seeing with Windows 11 now. So the third and final reason as to why I think Windows 11 exists actually relates to a lot of the controversy Windows 11 has been facing. So the controversy comes from the minimum requirements your PC needs to meet before it can run Windows 11. During the event, Microsoft confidently said that Windows 11 would be a free upgrade to Windows 10 users. So it stood to reason that anyone running Windows 10 now could update to Windows 11 eventually. And then things started to get a bit messy. As of this video right now, the minimum requirement to run Windows 11 on a computer is that it must support the TPM 2.0 security module that helps with the security of the system. And then Microsoft also said that a computer running an 8th gen Intel CPU or a 2nd gen Ryzen CPU should be able to run Windows 10 with no problems, which basically created a cutoff point for anything below that. And this caused an uproar because just like that, devices that were capable of running Windows 11 with no problems were suddenly denied this update, and software wise, they were now obsolete, stuck on Windows 10 until its end of support in 2025. Microsoft is currently trying to iron out some of these requirements, and recently they announced that they are lowering down some of these requirements to allow 7th gen Intel CPUs. And who knows, with enough backlash from the online community, maybe Microsoft might backpedal on this requirement since everyone was able to run it on their machines even without the TPM module with the leaked build of Windows 11. So clearly this requirement is artificial on Microsoft's end. And I kind of hope they do backpedal on this, because if they don't, my PC back there, which was built in 2014, won't be able to run Windows 11 based on Microsoft's current requirements. So that begs the question, why did Microsoft build in this requirement? Well, the short and lazy answer would be it's all planned obsolescence. Microsoft and all these chip makers just want you to buy more computers, and this is one of the ways they can force older CPUs to be outdated, and you would have to buy a new laptop or a new desktop, and you know, it's more money in their pockets, that old song and dance. But I don't know, I feel that this answer is a bit too vague and empty. Like, if Microsoft and these chip makers really wanted you to upgrade your device and give them more money, they have so many other ways of doing this more efficiently. Just look at Windows Vista. I think that the answer is a bit more nuanced than that, and it might be the actual reason why Windows 11 was created in the first place. In the last few years, we've seen outbreaks of attacks such as Spectre and Meltdown, which utilize exploits in the CPU hardware to carry out malicious attacks. These hardware-level exploits make use of the way the CPU was built, and if there's a flaw in the hardware, they can use that flaw to carry out their attacks. And no matter how many software updates you push out, once there's a flaw in the way the hardware was built, you cannot fix that through a software update. And the only way to fix that is to make sure that the next generation of that hardware doesn't have that same hardware flaw. Spectre and Meltdown affected almost every production CPU from before 2018, and who knows what other exploits are out there which we just don't know about. So my theory behind why Windows 11 is so strict with these requirements is because Microsoft wants to create a virtual stopgate to protect all these computers from such vulnerabilities. It's been reported that these TPM modules, as well as all the other security features found on the computers that support Windows 11, are able to block up to 60% of malicious attacks. So, if Microsoft released this new version of Windows which was only meant for these newer, more secure devices, they're basically creating an ecosystem where its users are better protected by default. Then in the next few years, people start to upgrade their systems, and these new systems come with Windows 11 pre-installed, and the number of people running Windows 10 and below start to decrease as the years go by, and more of its users are then better protected on Windows 11. So in a way, this could be seen as Microsoft trying to be proactive rather than reactive in case something happens. And in a way, it sort of plays into the fact why Microsoft decided to branch out into Windows 11 rather than try to keep updating Windows 10, since these vulnerabilities slowly started coming out after Windows 10 was announced, and this probably put a stop to their plans to keep updating Windows 10 indefinitely. And those are my theories as to why Windows 11 exists. I like what I see in Windows 11 so far. The new design is a welcome change. The new features introduced are long overdue, and my number one feature is the improvements to multiple displays, since now it doesn't just kick you out of your apps when you unplug your external display. But at the same time, I'm kind of worried for Microsoft here, because if we look at their past track record, it kind of goes something like this.
Sometimes may be good, sometimes may be shit.
They would knock it out of the park with one version of Windows and then just fall flat on their face in the next version. And what's worrying is Windows 10 was considered the version where they knocked it out of the park compared to Windows 8. And what worries me is the controversy behind the minimum requirements and this TPM module might be what causes that streak to continue with Windows 11. Which, in that case, I guess, better luck to Windows 12. I hope that Microsoft finds a healthy middle ground between its security ambitions and just not screwing over millions of people who can't afford a new PC right now. Because for the first time in a long time, I feel like this next version of Windows actually feels like an evolution, and it would be a waste if Windows 10 users don't get to try it out. And that's been Windows 11 Explained. Are you guys looking forward to the new Windows update? Do you like it? Do you hate it? Let me know down in the comments below. And as always, if you enjoyed this video, like, comment, share, subscribe, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Take care.